6 meters. That's all the ground that separated us from a field we'd sworn to each other, more than once, that we would never cross. 6 meters. I know the number exactly because I paced it out myself, twice, the week before, just to have something solid to hold onto in a place where almost nothing else felt solid anymore. And by the time those 6 meters were behind me, I already understood that I'd done something I couldn't undo. I'm not going to pretend I've been completely at peace since then. I haven't. But I think enough time has passed now that I can finally tell it the way it actually happened, start to finish, without stopping myself halfway through the way I usually do. So bear with me. This one takes a while to get where it's going, and I think it needs to. I've tried telling shorter versions of it before, and every time, something important got left out. So this time I'm not cutting corners. I want to start by saying I've never told this story in full before, not of any people who were close to me during that time. Not because I forgot any of it. I haven't forgotten a single second, and I don't think I ever will, but because some stories need distance before you're ready to say them out loud without your voice doing something strange in the middle of them. This is one of those. So I'm going to lay it out for you exactly the way it unfolded, in order, without skipping ahead to the part that matters most, because honestly, I'm not sure I know which part that is yet myself. You can decide for yourself, by the end, what you think actually happened out there. I've stopped needing anyone to believe me. I just need to say it out loud. Finally, all the way through, there were 4 of us on watch that week. Me, a sapper we all just called Dole, a signals guy everyone had nicknamed Griff, because his real name was long and nobody had the patience for it under fire, and a new transfer who hadn't been with the unit long enough yet to earn a nickname of his own. Hestel went by his surname, which somehow made him feel more temporary than the rest of us, like he hadn't fully arrived yet. Our position sat at the edge of a field that had already changed hands twice that year, which meant, at least on paper, that it was mapped, marked, and understood. We had clean lanes cut through it, painted posts driven into the dirt at even intervals, red and white tape strung at knee height, the whole ritual you learn to trust with your life because you have to. There's a kind of faith you develop in those markers, the same way you trust a traffic light without thinking about it, until the day something makes you question it. We'd walked those lanes so many times that our feet knew the turns before our eyes did. You stop thinking about where you're stepping. Your body just remembers, the way your hand remembers a familiar doorknob in the dark. 6 meters past the last marker post was where the actual field began, the part none of us were supposed to go near for any reason at all, under any circumstances, no exceptions. That was the rule and everyone understood it without needing it repeated. I want you to hold onto that number, because it comes back later, in a way none of us saw coming, and honestly, in a way I still think about most nights when I can't sleep. It was Griff who noticed the first strange thing. His handheld screen kept jumping, not going dark the way it usually did when we lost signal entirely, which by then felt almost comforting in its predictability, but doing something worse. It would show our position somewhere we clearly weren't standing, correct itself for a second, hold steady just long enough to trust, then jump again to somewhere else just as wrong. None of us panicked over it right away. By that point in the war, that kind of interference had become a most background noise to us, the electronic equivalent of static on an old radio. It wasn't always simple jamming anymore, where the signal just goes blank and you know exactly what you're dealing with. Sometimes it was spoofing instead, a more deliberate, more unsettling kind of interference where the receiver doesn't fail outright. It lies to you confidently instead, feeding you coordinates that feel every bit as real and trustworthy as the true ones would. Griff swore under his breath, the way he always did when technology let him down, like it had personally betrayed him, and switched over to the paper map instead, the one folded into quarters in his vest pocket that none of us particularly liked using because it meant admitting the modern stuff had failed us again. Old training doing the job the electronics couldn't anymore. It felt, at the time, like nothing more than an annoyance. A minor in convents we'd laugh about later, back at the position, over something warm to drink. None of us had any reason yet to think it meant anything more than that. What none of us expected was Ole's compass doing something strange about 20 minutes after that. I noticed him first, because he'd gone quiet, which wasn't like him at all. Ole was the kind of person who filled silencio automatically, out of habit more than need. I asked him what was wrong, and for a second, he didn't answer. He just kept looking down at it, longer than a glance should ever take. Then he looked up, past me, toward the open field ahead of us, like he was trying to physically match what the compass whistling him against what his own eyes were seeing in front of him. Back and forth, compass to horizon, horizon to compass, like his eyes were doing thinking his mouth wasn't ready to do yet. The needle wasn't spinning wildly or doing anything dramatic like you might picture. It had just settled, calm and confident, in a direction that didn't agree with a single landmark around us. Wrong, but sure of itself. That's somehow worse than a compass that just spins uselessly and refuses to commito anything. A confused compass you can dismiss easily enough. Chalk it up to a bad battery or a cracked housing. A confident, wrong compass makes you start questioning your own sense of direction instead, which is a much harder thing to shake off once it starts. Later, much later, back at a forward aid station, someone explained the mechanism to me in plain terms, and it made a strange kind of sense once I heard it laid out. A compass needle can genuinely be pulled off true by a large enough concentration of buried metal nearby. It's the same basic principle military teams use to detect landmines from the air with sensitive instruments. Enough ferrous material sitting under the ground bends the electromagnetic field just enough to throw a needle off, sometimes by a lot. None of us said that part out loud in the moment, standing there in the tall grass with the light starting to lean sideways the way it does late in the afternoon. We didn't have to say it. If the ground near us held enough metal to visibly bend a compass needle from where we were standing, we weren't just near a minefield in the abstract, theoretical way you're taught to respect every field out there. We were standing right up against the edge of a genuinely dense one, close enough that it was already reaching out and touching our instruments before it had ever touched us directly. We slowed down after that, without anyone giving the order out loud, without anyone needing to. You don't stop completely in a place like that. Stopping is its own kind of signal to anyone who might be watching you from a distance, and none of us wanted to advertise our uncertainty. But we slowed, spread a little further apart than usual, dropped our voices down to almost nothing above a whisper. The new transfer kept glancing sideways at each of us, waiting for someone to explain what was happening, and none of us had anything solid enough to offer him yet. And that's when I heard it for the first time. A voice, calling out from somewhere past the tree line to our left, past where the marker posts ended and the real danger technically began. Not shouting exactly, calling, the way you call for someone you fully expect to hear you and answer back. It called out a name. Not mine, not Ole's, not Griff's. It called out Sashko. Sashko hadn't been with us in 3 months. Sashko was gone, and I don't say that carefully or with any room left over for doubt, because I was there when it happened. I helped carry him afterward. There is no version of that day, no matter how many times I've turned it over since, in the quiet hours when I can't fall asleep, where I'm unsure about what I saw with my own eyes. And I can tell you with complete certainty that whoever, or whatever, was calling that name from somewhere out past the wire that afternoon was not him. It couldn't have been. I told myself, in the space of maybe 2 or 3 seconds, that it had to belly wind, that some piece of loose metal or wire out there had caught a gust off air in a shape that happened to sound, just barely, close enough, like anim I knew far too well to mistake for anything else. People do that under stress. The mind reaches for the nearest familiar explanation available and fills in the rest of the gap on its own, without asking permission first. It told myself a lot of things in those few seconds, one after another, each only a little less convincing than the last. A medic explained something to me weeks later, back when I finally brought myself to mention it out loud for the first time, and I didn't have the vocabulary for it at the time. He told me that hearing the voice of someone you've lost is far more common than most people assume, and nowhere near as rare or as alarming as it feels in the moment it happens to you. Something like a third to half of people who grieve someone close eventually report hearing them again afterward, in one form or another, sometimes once, sometimes many times over years. It isn't a sign that you're relishing your grip on things, he told me, and I remember exactly how he said it, like he'd said it to plenty of people before me. It's actually one of the most ordinary, well-documented parts of how grief settles into a person, especially grief that arrives suddenly, violently, the way it so often does in a war like this one. But standing there in that field, none of that context existed for me yet. None of it. All I knew, in that instant, standing perfectly still with my pulse suddenly very loud in my own ears, was that I had just heard a dead friend's name called from somewhere I couldn't place, in a stretch of ground where our GPS had already lied to us once that afternoon and hour. Compass could hold us straight, bearing to save its life. And then all I heard it, too. That's the part that stays with me more than almost anything else from the entire day. If it had only been me standing there, I could have written the whole thing off afterward, quietly, to myself, and moved on with some comfortable explanation. Exhaustion, grief finally catching up with me after a long stretch without enough sleep, my own mind playing a cruel, specific trick on me at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong place. But it wasn't only me. Ola's face told me everything before either of us said a single word out loud. We looked at each other for a long second, maybe two, and neither of us said the obvious thing sitting right there between us, which was this. Someone, or something, out there in that field knew exactly which name would make the two of us turn around without thinking twice. I want to be honest with you about why we turned toward it instead of walking away, because I've had a lot of time since then to sit with that decision and pick it apart. It wasn't courage. I want to be really clear about that, because people always want to make it sound braver than it was. It wasn't even really a decision in the way decisions usually feel, weighed and considered and chosen. It was closer to instinct, the kind that gets drilled into you so deeply during training that it eventually overrides almost everything else your mind is trying carefully to tell you in that moment. If there's even a small chance that someone is alive out there and calling for help, you go. You don't debate it with yourself first. You don't form a plan. Your body starts moving before your mind has even finished building the sentence that's supposed to explain why. So we started forward, toward the sound, as quietly as for people carrying gear can possibly manage across uneven ground. And somewhere in that walk, without meaning to, without even noticing I'd started, I began counting steps under my breath. Some part of me needed a number to hold on to, something fixed and countable and reliable in a moment that otherwise felt like it was slipping out from under all of us at once. 6 meters. That's exactly how far the nearest safe lane ran before it ended at the last marker post, the boundary we'd respected without question for months. And 6 meters, near as any of us could tell in the moment, straining to place the sound exactly, was exactly how far past that post the voice seemed to be calling from. 6 meters between the line we had been trained our entire lives to respect without exception, and whatever it was out there that wanted us to cross it anyway, we didn't cross it. I want you to know that up front. So, you're not sitting here worried the entire rest of this story. Olive put a hand out flat against my chest before either of us actually stepped past that post, stopping Mehmet's stride, and pointed down at the ground just beyond the marker, at a patch of grass sitting slightly wrong against the rest of the field, pressed down in a shape that didn't belong to wind, and didn't belong to any animal either, not one we knew of anyway. No voice called out again after that. Just silence, thick enough that I could hear my own pulse in my ears again. The particular kind of silence you only get in a field that has stopped pretending to be empty and started, instead, to feel like it's watching you back, patiently, waiting to see what you'll do next. I'm not going to walk you through every single detail of the next 20 minutes it took us to get back to our position that afternoon. Some of it isn't mine to put into words, even now, even after all this time has passed and I've had every opportunity to make peace with it. What I can tell you is this. We made it back, all 4 of us, including the new transfer, who didn't say a word the entire walk back and hasn't really talked about that day since. As far as I know, Allah backed us out along the exact line of our own footprints, one careful, deliberate step at a time, checking the ground each time before he let his weight settle. And somehow, through some mix of training and plain undeserved luck, none of us got hurt that day, but something else came back with us, besides the 4 of us. A question that none of us have ever really been able to answer since, no matter how many times we've circled back around to it quietly, usually late at night, usually when none of us can sleep and the conversation drifts there without anyone steering it on purpose. Whether what we heard out there was wind moving through wire, shaped by 4 grieving minds into a name we all recognized instantly and painfully, or some kind of interference doing something strange to our hearing, the same way it had already done something strange to our GPS and our compass that same afternoon, within the same Alreven, or something else entirely, something I genuinely don't have a clean explanation for and probably never will, no matter how many years pass. Whatever it actually was, it led us somewhere real, somewhere genuinely dangerous, and it did it across exactly 6 meters, the same number, start to finish, like the whole afternoon had been quietly built around it from the very beginning. I've thought about those 6 meters more than almost anything else from the entire year, more than I've thought about plenty of things that objectively made it more, not really because of what was sitting under that patch of grass, waiting patiently for someone careless enough to find it. More because of how easily a sound shaped like someone, we mismoved all four of our feet before our minds ever caught up to what we were actually doing out there. That's the part that stays with me at night, if I'm honest with you. Not the field itself, not even the trap underneath it. It's how willingly, how instantly, all of us turned toward a voice we already knew, on some level, couldn't possibly be real, simply because some part of each of us needed it to be real badly enough that it overrode everything we'd ever been trained to do, everything we knew to be true. I still don't have a tidy, satisfying answer for what we heard in that field that day. I've stopped expecting one, honestly, and I think that's probably for the best. Maybe you have a theory of your own by now, listening to this, turning it over the way I have so many times. Maybe something similar has happened to you somewhere far from any minefield, in a hospital room, or aggregate house at 3 in the morning, in that particular stretch of silence where your mind starts filling in gaps with whoever you miss the most, whoever you'd give almost anything to hear one more time. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, there are more like it waiting for you on this channel, and I can promise you, none of them end quite the way you think they're going to. I'll see you in the next one.